The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one. And I'm sure that there's still a lot of people that's locked down, can't get out and go do things. So we hope you just sit back and enjoy the show tonight. We've got a great show lined up. And with us tonight, we have Barbara Duncan.
I am here.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
He may have dropped off the call.
Oh, he did. Oh, wow. Well, until he gets back, do you think you can introduce our guest, Barbara?
Well, I think I know who she is.
Oh, okay.
We've talked several times. She's an awesome guest, as a matter of fact. I assume paranormal investigator, psychic, and paranormal parapsychology scholar, which is different than paranormal. Please get that right, folks. Yeah. Oh, well, it really does make a difference because I've studied parapsychology and the paranormal. They are two different little beasts. We both know. Yes. It's our guest, Darcie McGrath.
Hi, everybody.
Yay.
All right.
And, we'll probably have a better introduction once Jeff gets back on, because he does all the bio stuff.
Yeah, let me see if
But it's always lots of fun just talking with Darcie.
I
like your shop. Yeah.
All right.
It's so much
Let me call him back in here. Well,
yeah.
Jeff, are you on?
Nope.
No.
He's
Okay.
not. Because we can talk a little bit about... Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the difference between paranormal and parapsychology, because I don't think a lot of people know.
Right. And, there really isn't a big difference, as it is a field of study. Paranormal is basically anything outside the normal, something that cannot be explained by regular senses or science, or standard science, I should say. Parapsychology is the study of human consciousness, or trying to determine the origins of human consciousness, where it resides, and if it survives the person themselves that is affecting the atmosphere through psychokinesis, telekinesis, RSPK, current spontaneous psychokinesis, which is otherwise known as poltergeist.
You guys were muted. I tried to call Jeff, and it blanked you guys out, and it took me a second to get you guys back on. So,
oh no!
Yeah.
You mean that whole conversation?
Yeah, and I was trying to get you back on. Matter of fact, I even added you to another call, and you didn't pick up on it. So, Jeff, are you back on? No. Let me add Jeff back in here then, because I got him right here. Hopefully.
Okay, right, he can add himself back in too.
Well, he was trying. I don't think he did very good. So, I'm calling him now, trying to get him back in. Anyway.
So nobody heard our lovely little discussion?
Nobody heard it. You can do it all again. That's because I didn't even hear it.
Darcie, let's talk about the difference between paranormal investigations and parapsychology.
Sure. Paranormal investigating tends to focus on the external stimulus going on in the house, whether you're hearing audio phenomenon or experiencing visual phenomenon. The paranormal investigators will go through using their equipment to gauge the environment and try to capture some of that phenomenon that the experiencer in the location might be experiencing. It helps give them peace of mind that this is not something that they're making up in their head. So that serves a distinct purpose. Parapsychology actually studies human consciousness, so it looks for the haunting within. So it's actually looking at psychic ability, gauging psychic ability, how the person's consciousness might be affecting the location and maybe even adding to the paranormal activity going on in the house that might be separate from an external entity that might be in the house. So while the paranormal investigators are going around with their equipment, a parapsychologist might go around. Oh, I think we got Jeffrey back.
Yeah. Yes.
There he is.
So, and the parapsychologist also would be looking at, I would assume, the subjects thinking, is this a possible case of telekinesis? Is this a possible case of common ESP? Or is there something else going on there too? So that you're absolutely right. There can be live human reasons behind paranormal activity.
Mm-hmm. And if you're lucky enough to have a parapsychologist that has a strong psychological background, they might be able to screen for other things, such as maybe possible bipolar or schizophrenia or other mental disorders that might be adding to the situation. I'm not a psychologist. I would like to hopefully finish that degree someday. Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of parapsychologists that do have backgrounds in that, and they can screen for those things.
Mm-hmm. And it's also really interesting to see that there are branches of that too. Like a lot of neurobiologists are discussing, we really haven't completely evolved as a human species yet. Our brains will probably still be evolving. So that there are differences in how some people behave on a more evolutionary scale.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've talked about that in our human consciousness class. For anybody that's interested in learning more about human consciousness, the Rhine is doing ongoing online classes right now, if I can give a shameless plug. We're taking one right now with Professor Loyd Auerbach, who is a parapsychologist and has been for many, many years. And we actually talked about some of that in our class about near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And how are they really near-death experiences, or do we just have a failed understanding of what death is? Do we have we have a clinical definition of what death is to us right now, but even with our equipment, our medical equipment that we have plugged into, the client who's having this phenomena happening to them, we're still grasping at what that technology is telling us. So,
well, I think we talked before about this. There's a book called The Origins of the Human Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. And even back then, he was talking about early human consciousness levels and the voices from God, etc., and the fact that the mind hadn't quitely split into the left brain, right brain hemispheres. So there was that audio hallucinations that were actually one part of the brain trying to talk to the other part of the brain. So even back then, you find an evolutionary process that may still be happening here, because we haven't quite figured out how the brain totally works yet either.
Right, yeah. And back then we often attributed those visions to paranormal sources, which nowadays we're looking at a little differently. Mm-hmm. Shamans being able to receive information through ritual and people having prophetic visions. Nowadays we look at that more as clairvoyance and prognostication versus prophecy experiences. Mm-hmm. So our understanding has updated as we study. So.
Yeah. Paraanthropology is just a lovely subject to get into.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. If anybody's interested in that, Dr. Christopher Larson at North Carolina Wilmington does quite a bit with that, and so does Professor Loyd Auerbach.
There is an online magazine now called the Journal of Paraanthropology.
Paraanthropology, yes, I love that.
Lovely book. Lovely book. I love it. Yeah.
So everything falls into the category of para.
Yeah, it's outside the standard scientific understanding. So, yeah. And that's where I have a lot of conversations with people that have experiences. And I say, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. Well, prove to me it's not paranormal. I said, I just did. It could it could be that you have other explanations for how this could be happening. And they just look at me puzzled like they don't understand. And I think, media feeds into that. But they kind of forget what the definition of paranormal really is.
Yeah.
Oh.
Are we all there?
Yeah, we're still on. I thought Barbara was fixing to ask something else, so.
Well, we were just talking. We could talk shop for hours right now, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, there's a lot happening. And, it's interesting that it's happening now, and if there is an uptick in paranormal activity, and how much of it is simply pent up energy, as we talk about poltergeist cases being nothing more than pent up energy and nowhere to basically funnel it to.
Matter of fact, I got this article that we were talking about tonight with the New York Times. I got it from the Paranormal Research Foundation, and they turned me on to, because I'm on their Facebook site, and I was reading it, and I posted it to my site, and I half jokingly said, well, there goes my paper idea, because I always thought that would be a fascinating paper to write about ghosts in quarantine, what kind of experiences where people have. So who answers but Brian Williams, the head of the PRF? And so when are you going to write it, basically, is what he said. And I'm like, oh, my God.
Well, now you're stuck.
Oh, yeah. Well, we started hashing out, how could we do this? How do we clarify experiences versus, COVID virus. I mean, one of the main symptoms of the COVID virus is, of course, high fever.
Right.
And it's like, well, how do you know people are hallucinating with the high fever? How do you rule that person didn't have COVID? And how do you ask that without violating HIPAA? And and so we were kind of tossing some ideas back and forth. But I think a quantitative study of the number of people. So if anybody wants to contact me at my Facebook site and tell me their stories, I would love to hear them. Well, so if you have any listeners tonight that are having experiences out there, I'd love to hear them, and maybe I can plug a survey in and have them feed me some information on that.
Oh, good idea.
So with parapsychology, when someone says they heard something or seen something, through parapsychology, you start checking to see if there is something or if it's something else altogether. And when you get rid of everything else, does anything lead back to saying, oh, yeah, it must be a spirit or something?
Well, there's never going to be 100% definitive, yes, it's a spirit, but you can definitely add more evidence to the fact that it could be. Any skeptic's going to find a way to tear this apart, unfortunately. We're not at a stage right now where we can say 100% and prove it that we have a spirit here, but we can rule things out specifically, like, again, were you suffering a high fever at the time? Have you been diagnosed with COVID? Have you had paranormal experiences before this at this location? Have you had paranormal experiences at other locations before this? Has your family had experiences within their own family in different locations? And, things like that. You can go down a survey checklist and start feeding into the possibility that, oh, maybe this could be a psychic experience, a mediumship, or, psychic experience where they have really witnessed something. Now, it's kind of, you have to rule some things out. And I get these cases every year, and everybody does too that does paranormal investigating, where people are outside in the summertime enjoying themselves and having a blast, and then they come back in the fall, and all of a sudden they forget what their house sounds like. They forget about the furnace checking on, and oh my gosh, the bangs and the shimmies in the register are suddenly a ghost, or the animals that are digging into the attic for the wintertime to hunker down are scratching and clawing at the ceiling, and oh my gosh, we got a ghost up there. And it's quick. People can be quick to jump to judgment that they have a paranormal thing going on, and you have to rule those things out. And I've done that before.
Okay.
Where I've been into houses and had to dig through attics.
I actually like in one first or second Conjuring movie, which is kind of loosely based on Lorraine and Ed Warren. they do show them in one house showing that the sounds they're hearing are the pipes
Yeah.
up in the attic. And I was like, that's impressive. They didn't just jump right into Zach Bagan. Well, you must have a demon territory.
Yeah, no, that came later. But you got to rule those things out, because obviously if you can't be chasing ghosts if that's not what it is at all, and you're not adding any credence to the field too if you're automatically jumping to that conclusion.
Very
And
true.
you're not helping the client either.
Now, I know that I've been on case or in places where you've actually done investigating, and I mean you had equipment set up everywhere. My question is, have you ever got any evidence, and was it voices or was it just sounds?
I seem to be the one that's really good at capturing EVP. I had some thrown at me by a mutual friend of ours, and said, "Hey, you should hear this. It's, we were over at the monument in Gettysburg, and it was near the dogs, the dog monument, the Irish Brigade document, or monument there. And it's like, you can hear the dog barking." And I said, "Well, send me the link." And he sent it to me, and I'm like, "That's not what I hear at all. They're saying your name." And he's like, whoa, what? I said, "Well, I have to listen to the original recording. This sounds like it's been run through a filter, so we'll have to look at that." But that's just something that my ear is a little bit better than most. And I have heard from other people too that if you are in music or in music production, those people are really good for listening for dissonance, what's not supposed to be there. They're a little bit better at clearing that out in their mind while they're listening. Other people, it takes a lot of practice to do that. But I usually jump in there and I can hear that stuff a little clearer than others, but that's just my strength.
Now let's talk a little bit about the cases where you would find that it may not be paranormal, it may be the person involved in that too. Is there a method now where you can set up saying, well, poltergeist activity, well, it could be something paranormal. It could also be just the mind being able to use the energy. Like, I think we all figured out that through martial arts and Taoist monks that you can use chi to push things away. So at what point do you start to analyze the client and simply say, well, you know what, you may have the ability, it may be paranormal, but it's not a ghost.
Right, and that could be sometimes where I get called back more than once. And a medium, a good practiced medium who's been doing field investigation for a while, not just any medium. I have some people that are like, well, my next door neighbor came over and she's been able to see things since she was little and she says it's this. Well, somebody who does mediumship sporadically versus somebody who does it either professionally or in regular field investigation is going to have a little sharper focus on what's going on. And I'll have mediums, and I do have mediums that can come in and they can distinguish between a thought projection or discarnate, a dead person. So they can walk through the house. And of course, if they're walking through the house and they're not finding any dead people, but we're having evidence of things happening, things moving, things apporting, moving from place to place in a blink of an eye, that's a sign of psychokinesis at work. And then the real challenge then, especially if you have a multiple person household, is trying to figure out which one of them it is. And you could have multiples.
True.
You could have two, and I had that in a case in downtown here, where they called me back repeatedly, and they're reporting the same phenomenon happening over and over. And I said, this sounds like PK. And when it started formulating a psychological pattern, a projection of the subconscious that's dealing or wrestling with an issue, a psychological issue, will oftentimes manifest in the activity that's happening. Mm-hmm. And it's, if somebody's having trouble, like with Loyd Auerbach had a case one time with a young boy that really didn't want to be on the swim team, but his parents were pressuring him to do it. There would be water phenomena happening all over the house. the sinks would come on by themselves. Water would appear in midair and just fall to the floor. And it was his subconscious manifesting that desire to tell his parents, I don't want to be in swim class, but he just couldn't do it. And it was manifesting in this phenomenon in this way. And in the case we had downtown here, the son had come out of the closet, and he was struggling with his own sexual identity. The family, from what I understood, seemed very comfortable with the fact, who knows what the family dynamic is when you step outside the house? You don't know. Unless you really, really dig in and play therapist, which I can't do. But, there's no problem there. But you could tell by all the photos that were being rearranged in the living room, all of the immediate family members' photos were inverted upside down. Every single photo sitting on the shelf were upside down, except for one. And I said, well, who's this handsome gentleman here? Oh, well, that's his grandfather. He's the only one that doesn't know right now. So his perceived relationship with his family was upside down with everybody that knew. But his grandfather didn't know, so that relationship was okay.
Huh.
Wow. So when you start seeing psychological things like that, then it's more or less a living agent than it is a discarnate.
So when we start talking about these battling energies, or I should say subconscious arguments that are going back and forth, when we start talking about, and I hate the word tulpa because it's getting really overused, but when you start looking at family dynamics or group dynamics and you start thinking these arguments themselves could be creating something that just sort of lashes out at all of them as opposed to just direction.
That's correct. And I have a medium that I work with that's very, very good at discerning that. And we had a case not too long ago. We had a young client that was bipolar. And she was medicating to a degree. I had the feeling that she wasn't medicating full time because there would be times where she would just take off in the middle of the night and a couple days later she'd come back. And she was living with extended family, and she had several children also. So she would take off and...
We talking self-medicated or?
A little bit of both.
Okay, yeah.
And that caused a lot of consternation in the family. It caused a lot of anger issues, a lot of arguments. And the medium came into the house with me, and I didn't tell him anything about this. I took the initial information, and he said, there's this dark cloud that is hanging over the dinner table. And he turned and looked directly at the client and says, you need to stop talking to each other like that. That is bad. It is feeding this thing. And... it was slashing out so badly that the... Sorry?
Jeff, you're breaking up.
Saying, where else do you eat but at the dinner table?
Jeff,
I heard a little bit of that about the dinner table.
Yeah. Jeff, you're breaking up.
There was a lot of cross argument going on at the dinner table, and there was even an event where the client and the mother or the grandmother were getting into it in front of us and arguing. Mm-hmm. And I was doing my best to try to calm things down, and I noticed to the side the medium was backing up and backing away. And after we got out of there and had our dinner afterwards where we compared notes, he says, you didn't see me do that, did you? I said, well, I kind of noticed you backing away. And he said, you didn't see the black thing that merged from the floor between the two of them while they were arguing like that. And the moment you got them to calm down, it went away. And he could see all this psychically. And
that's fascinating that it's an actual... I mean, I know the concept of that, but it's an actual manifestation that people can see.
Yeah, and sometimes if you have psychic ability, you can see it better than others. And I do hear people often on telling me that, oh yeah, I've had this shadow since I was probably young, and I see it from time to time. But when my boyfriend moved in and we started fighting, it really, really started getting visible, and even my boyfriend could see it.
Mm-hmm.
And
It sounds a lot like Paranormal Activity, and it kind of makes me wonder if these people are just really excellent projectionists who can do all of that energy out there. And yeah, that's how they direct their anger. It's very focused.
yeah, as in
Yeah,
psychology, we call it disassociation.
mhm.
And if you've undergone trauma as you're younger, or even in your older years, if you've learned to disassociate your emotions, you can manifest this separate entity from you. And since that entity has been created from your negative emotions, it seeks to be fed with those negative emotions. So it will try to charge an atmosphere to the point where you're arguing, or you're depressed, or you're drinking, or you're doing whatever to feed it, because it knows nothing else.
That would make total sense. You know, the kids saying, well, my invisible friend did it. And how many of those are actually not ghosts, but that, I mean, it may be an outward manifestation that the child can see of his own emotions and that confliction. No, honey, we don't act that way. But he needs to project that energy out somehow, so it becomes an imaginary friend.
Mm-hmm. And it could make sense, too, why at a certain age children don't see their imaginary friends anymore, because they've worked through that emotional maturity to the point that they don't
Well, you also
project anymore.
it's like the little blurbs they have on Instagram of people who, kids have an imaginary friend with pigtails, and it turns out that pigtails are actually a hanging rope because that's where someone had woman had committed suicide hanging herself on the stairs or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Everything is perception. And I remember in the bipolar case that we were talking about, the children were seeing an entity named Diego. And it was funny to hear the grandmother and the client talk about this thing like it was this menacing, evil thing, Diego. And I'm like, why are you talking about him like that? Because he's a demon. You've heard of Diego. He's a demon. I'm like, no, I have never heard of a demon named Diego. And I got to thinking about it after I was going through my notes. I called back and I said, do your children watch cable television? Well, yeah, they do. I said, do they watch the Cartoon Network? Well, they watch Nickelodeon. I said, do they watch Dora the Explorer? Well, yes, they do. I said, do you know the name of Dora the Explorer's little friend? It's Diego. And Diego is a little boy with brown hair and brown eyes. And that's what the children were reporting as seeing, is this boy with brown hair and brown eyes.
Oh.
And here they were talking about this thing like it was a demon. And I'm like, no, they're associating what they know from TV and naming their friend what they recognize. And it was quite telling, because the medium who came in and who also witnessed the disparaging energy and the anger issues and stuff, he found two children upstairs, a little girl and a little boy. And the little boy had brown hair and brown eyes. But the family was absolutely adamant this had to be a demon. I mean, they were absolutely adamant they had the conjuring going on in their house. And I said, nobody has the conjuring going on in their house because it didn't really happen. But I mean, I shouldn't say it really didn't happen, but it's been, built upon over all this time. But yeah, the movie itself is not really representative of the actual original case either.
Sure.
But because it's not exciting enough.
Oh yeah, well, a lot of people don't know that. All they see, and I've done lectures on based on a true story is basically what I called it, and we've gone through the movies one by one and judged it on the truth meter, based on the original cases and what the movie actually evolved into being, and sometimes even the remakes. It was fascinating to see when they did Amityville Horror. It was based on a novel by Jay Anson. But the second reincarnation of Amityville Horror, based on a true story. It changed.
You mean I can poltergeist? I can't access the afterlife through my closet in the bedroom? I mean,
Well, you can always try.
Yeah.
I would advise it.
jeez, I just I'm not going to get people ascending to heaven through my staircase. It's just no. I guess that would be a stairway to heaven, but we won't go there.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we're not going to get a whole lot of hate mail on that one. Sorry. But,
No, I did like the movie, but it just anytime any of your children ever bug you for a pool, just show them Poltergeist, and they'll never ask you for a backyard pool again.
Or Jaws. Jaws worked for me. Yeah. People's perception going into a situation can very well color what they perceive is going on. And as a parapsychologist, you have to be aware of that too. So that's why it's important to know, anthropological things, sociological things, what's their culture represent as paranormal? What does their religion represent, as when it comes to the paranormal? You need to be very much aware of those things when you're going in for a case, because it can very well color their perceptions of what's going on.
Well,
do you also ask? Go ahead.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say there's a series that just wrapped up its first season called Destination Fear, one of the Travel Channel. Hey, we're all paranormal all the time almost. Where Dakota, the lead investigator who used to work with Zach, would be he decided to conduct what he called a psychological experiment to see how they could work through their fear, and they would go to these famous haunted places. I don't think they went to Waverly. They didn't, or Pottstown, but they did go to like Mansfield and places like that. And all I kept thinking is the one thing they're missing is a control. Somebody like me who doesn't jump out of their skin if something, a penny falls on the floor. And I would love to be in some of these locations. But yeah, like you say, they go in there fully expecting to have the pants scared off of them, and sure enough, what a surprise they do.
Yeah, they do. And that's why I find it really humorous when these people are using this equipment and they go into a haunted location, and whenever that equipment triggers, it's got to be a ghost because they're in a haunted location. But if they took that equipment home and had it happen in their own house, they'd be looking for alternative reasons because obviously their house isn't haunted. But that's a perception issue.
Sleeping in a tent in the yard too, That's it.
Well, I mean, is one of the questions that a lot of investigative teams ask people is, how many of these ghost shows on TV do you watch? Do you watch a lot? And are they, if they're going to say, no, I don't watch that sort of stuff on television, then they would have a completely different slant on how to do the investigation.
That's true. And, I would hope an investigation team that's been doing this for a while has a good interviewer that takes the time to do that. Unfortunately, with a lot of investigative teams I've seen around local parts anyway, they don't take the time to do that. They go charging out the equipment, guns blazing. And they spend very little time talking to the client at all. But that is a very poignant question to ask. And there are so many different ways to answer that question, too. So as a interviewer, you have to be listening for the answers and be willing to deviate from the checklist if need be. Like I've had a case before where I've asked, do you drink? Well, not very often. I said, and if somebody wasn't paying attention, they might glaze over and go to the next question. But I said, well, okay, describe very often. Oh, well, I drink every night before I go to bed, just one glass of wine, 1 to 2 glasses of wine every night. That's supposed to be good for you. And I'm like, what? She had read some story and in a news mag somewhere saying that this was good for heart health to drink wine, but you don't drink 2 glasses of wine every single night.
You're doing lockdown.
Let's hear it for
But that was-
resveratrol. Yeah. Woo.
But when it came down, I dug into that deeper and deeper, and I found out that was the only way she could relax to go to bed at night, because she was alone in the house, and she, things would happen at night, and so she would drink to cope with it. So that's one of the you have to really pay attention to and have a really good checklist to go by, but be willing to deviate and dig deeper on the checklist if you have to.
So as we get into the quarantine and we find people, you have to stay at home, you have to do stuff, they start binge watching the Travel Channel or the poltergeist stuff or whatever, and all of a sudden, all those, because we're starting to get into the warmer season, all of those floor joists start popping, and they start screaming ghost. Or they're so pent up, like we talked about before, with that much energy. And, if my husband cracks his, knuckles one more time, I'm going to scream. Stuff, then, how much of that over a period of now 2 months in some cases, is going to accumulate? And if a psychic would walk into some of these houses right now, would they be bowled over with that much energy, do you think?
They could. I mean, they've already said they've had record amounts of divorce filings because people just are not meant to be in each other's space like that for long periods of time. And relationships are not lasting. They're getting angry with each other on every little thing. They're getting on each other's nerves, especially if they don't have that release valve to be able to leave the house and walk around. Sometimes you don't. It depends where you're at. But, a lot of that pent-up energy could manifest into a PK situation or a poltergeist situation where things are flying off the shelves and the first thing they jump to is ghost, because that's all they know. They're not everybody's familiar with the poltergeist phenomena. So, but and again, that's a perception issue. But I find that sometimes when you binge watching this stuff, it does not take very long.
Sure. For
things to start manifesting.
Yeah. Now here comes a big question then. Once it's starting to manifest and you get that entity, whatever it's called, does it dissipate, or do you have to do something to get it to dissipate?
Well, you have to
stop
stop
being fed.
Yeah, and that's sometimes if they can make that connection by themselves and stop watching it should dissipate on its own, because it's feeding off of that interest, that magnetized interest in the paranormal. And I've had to have that discussion with people in my classes before when they come in and they're taking my apparition cases or my apparition classes or my intro to parapsychology classes, that they're opening the door to whatever may happen, because by your interest alone, you're opening that door and things may start to happen. Or you may just be more apt to realize things are happening.
So let me ask you then, because, if you practice magic or you do any of that sort of thing and it all becomes intent, exactly how much of this is sort of like almost a ritual of a sort where, I'm stuck in this house, I can't stand it, this person is the cause of it, and all this stuff is going in. So you have almost a directed hex towards certain people. Mm-hmm. Does that sound?
Oh, that very well could happen. Yeah. That's what I was talking to Brian about. I was kind of joking with him about it. It's like, I can just hear the scenario right now between the boyfriend and the girlfriend. I can't believe you threw that plate at me after that argument. I didn't throw it at me. Well, who else could it have been? Well, when you start demeaning me like that at a regular basis, it brings out my feelings of insecurity that I had with my over-domineering father, and it happens or comes out as a PK outburst. And he's like, what? And she's like, what? Never mind. But that very well could be what happens, is that relationships get tried and triggers can be pulled, and even subconsciously, you may not be aware of it. Sometimes it takes an external person viewing the situation through fresh eyes to realize what's going on. But yeah, it can very well happen.
It could also flavor the entity to a certain degree, could it not? I mean, if you're having all these issues at home and you start binge watching the Travel Channel, and all of a sudden you start labeling everything that's happening around you as demonic, can it become demonic?
I don't know if you can create a demon out of your own thoughts. I mean, you can definitely perceive it.
You can make it nasty.
Yeah. I mean, if you're shedding off negative emotions and feeding this thing with that, it can very well appear demonic. But demonic is a different thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But
I use the term demonic with air quotes here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you're watching a lot of these television shows, they throw around that word loosely all the time.
Yeah.
And even when I talked to Amy Allen a couple of years ago, when I talked to her about using the D word, when she does Dead Files, and she just kind of rolled her eyes at me, and I said, so what does that mean? And she's just like, the producers make me use that word.
Yep.
And he's like, it's the only thing people can associate with on the mainstream level. So there's so many different manifestations these things can be. But that's what the producers seem to think gets people's juices flowing,
The D word sells.
The D word sells. So, but yeah, people could very well assume something is demonic based on their perception.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. Lots of things. And we were talking before this show went on, and I read it in Variety that there is a Bolivian orchestra that's stuck at a German castle, and it's been stuck there for 73 days. And it's a haunted castle.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking, here you are.
I get it.
Not only stuck in a foreign country, but you're stuck in a haunted castle. It's the Rheinsberg Palace,
right
outside of Berlin, and not only you're stuck in the castle, which is haunted, but you can't go outside because there's packs of wolves out there. So all of a sudden now you have the perfect horror trip, and I'm thinking what the mindset is, and I hearken back to Jeff, help me. What's the name of that movie? It's where they take these guys to a haunted house as a psychological test.
Haunting of Hill House? Or
Hill
13
House,
13 Ghosts.
Well, Hill House. I'm Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where
I think the experiment was more. Oh, that's right. The remake was more experimental.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you kind of think that way is when you get these people and you automatically set up an event that's almost a trigger. And then all of a sudden you realize, hey, we're stuck here. The house is haunted. What's going to happen, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. If you don't have the coping mechanism to deal with such things, you're in really, really big trouble. And of course, if you're the one setting up the triggers, you're the fall guy person for that. Yeah, that's evil. That's just mean to set somebody up like that. I mean, obviously, Hill House is meant to be like that. But I remember being when I docented out at Gettysburg, and I was in charge of the house we were at. We were having it just went right out the window. Reenactment. So I was the one on premises there, watching after all these reenactors outside the house. Well, at night I locked the door, and I go to bed in the house by myself. I had all sorts of things happen in that house, and I couldn't leave. I was responsible for all these people. I couldn't leave. So I had to stand up to the things that were there and basically make them back off, but not everybody has those skills. So I was lucky in that sense that I did, but I did think as I was going to bed, I was like, what if these people didn't? What if we had people staying here at the house? And I guess I had the director tell me before that he's come and taken people out of the house at night because it's gotten that active.
Wow.
And the volunteers just couldn't handle it.
Now, is that activity from real spirits or
Oh yes.
okay?
Oh yes. It was battlefield activity, definitely. It was definitely soldiers. I mean, you could hear the hard soul brogans on the hardwood coming up the stairs.
Oh, wow.
And the lights on the hallway were on, and those footsteps stopped at my doorframe, and there was nobody standing there.
So is
Yeah.
is that I don't want to say proof, but does that fit into the category of real spirits?
Well, it's definitely experiential. I mean, you can call that experiential evidence.
Okay.
Obviously, having more than one person there would have been advantageous than just me. But yeah, experiential evidence can be valuable once added to other things. So if you have an experience, because you can have a psychic experience that cannot be registered by any other device.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a little harder to prove to someone else. So if your end goal is to prove it to someone else, that may not be enough.
Very true. Yeah. And it's interesting when we start talking about this, but we're all stuck and we think we're stuck in maybe a haunted house because it's quarantined and we can't get out. We have to reverse that in a way and look at it from the standpoint of, are the ghosts in quarantine? They can't get out and they have to suffer through live people showing up.
Oh, yeah, I often think about that. I was reading the New York Times article, and I thought about that. It's just like some of the people that were in quarantine actually found the activity calming because someone else was there. And so they had, they got into conversations with what was there, and it made them feel better.
We don't know how well that works out in horror movies.
that always works well.
Yeah, totally.
In the short term, it can help you work through things. But in some cases, I often wonder that the activity is always there, but it's never really presented itself to the people that live there because face it, I mean, everybody's the same way. When they're in a house and they're in the rush to go to work in the morning and they hear a sound, they're more likely to brush it off in the effect of bustling off to work than to really analyzing it. So it isn't until you're locked within the four walls that you can really sit there and analyze it and go, oh, well, maybe those noises I've been hearing for the last year and a half that I've lived here weren't just the neighbors next door, and oh yeah, there's footsteps upstairs, and that's right, the upstairs unit's vacant. I forgot about that. The little things you recognize when you're locked up in your own four walls for a long time. There's a lot of things that the brain just dismisses.
Sure. But also, like I said, we're stuck here. Eventually, we'll be able to get out. And it's like having those unwanted house guests that you can't get rid of. And we have to ask ourselves on some of these ghost tours, etc. Are we the unwanted house guests? And should we be conducting ourselves in a little bit more appropriate manner walking in?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I've been in enough historical locations and volunteered enough that I've had to put my 2 cents in to say, hey, you know what, you really shouldn't be acting like that. And even when I started volunteering at the historical location where I was, they were talking about a death that had occurred in the house that the FBI Quantico had come in and done a thorough examination of the house from stem to stern and basically found these, mortician wax imprints on the floor, the blood on the stains on the floor. They've analyzed it all. And so they made those quote-unquote dead people part of the regular tour. And before they knew it, one location where they always talked about this imprint in the floor, they were having trouble with that room. The drapes were being pulled down. Things were being thrown around the room. They would come in the morning and furniture would be upset. Things would be knocked off the wall. And when I came in and started volunteering, I'm like, wait a minute, you're making this part of the tour? Well, yeah. Well, of course he's upset. You're talking about him like he's not here. He is here. And they just looked at me dumbfounded. And the moment I said that, the activity in the next room started getting louder. You could hear a male voice talking or trying to talk. And I'm like, see? He's in the next room. Because we went in there and there's nobody there. And, it's a pretty large acreage, so you're not going to have people wandering around the house unnoticed. And so I helped out a little bit with that situation and helped clarify the energy in the house there. And I asked them, I said, please be careful about how often you talk about that, because it's upsetting. They are here. They died here. They're still working through how they died here. And to talk about them like that is very upsetting. And they're like, oh, okay. Now that worked with some of the people that were doing the tours, and some of the other people, no, we're just going to go ahead and do this same old. I said, well, okay. There's only so much you can do.
It is sad.
Yeah.
And we sort of talk about, well, I guess on a lot of ghost tours, it would be the exact same thing. Yes. It would be like gossiping in front of your face to somebody on the other side, and how we present information about someone will dictate how the activity is going to take itself. Yeah. Are they going to bring you fresh flowers, or are they going to throw pots and pans at you?
Right, yeah. And a lot of these locations that are commercially advertising themselves to be haunted, like Posttown and Waverly Hills, the stories that you get out of those places are not positive ones. You're talking about the nurse that hung herself for being pregnant in the upper floors of the Waverly Hills. The child that fell down the stairs and broke their neck at the school. You're, by saying those stories over and over and over again, you're making the entity relive that tragedy over and over and over again. And whether you want to call a dead person still having a psyche, it can only take that so much before it starts acting out. And it's not going to like it. And it's kind of abuse in a way that we would never do to a living person.
Sure.
If a woman was violated, and you hear that on a lot of the ghost tours, there was a woman here, she was, and the investigators go through and, tell us who did it, who did this to you, what did he do to you, blah, 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 blah. We would never do that to a victim. It would be inhuman.
So
to a dead person,
it's worse than regular provoking.
Absolutely.
I got a question in the chat room. The Spooktacular wanted to know, is the places that you're talking about able to be visited?
No. And there are historical locations that do not promote that kind of thing, especially paranormal wise. Not all of them are happy to entertain that. This location, obviously, I will not give its name because they're not into that sort of thing. But the experiences are definitely worth noting because it does help understanding.
So let's talk a bit about the other spots too, because like the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, for example, right, where you have patients that were not that comfortable with reality to begin with, and may not be able to process the death process as well.
Yeah.
And you go in and start talking about them. That's going to bring on a whole different type of haunting, would it not?
It could. I mean, they could become attracted to you because you're paying attention to them. And that may be something that they're craving. And considering the mindset they may still be in, you're not really going to want that. They may do things to you or act out in certain ways that a person who was in an asylum might do. And so you have to be careful how you interact with entities like that. And I won't go to asylums. I won't go to prisons because I really don't go to those places in life because those people are in a precarious mental balance. They're not going to be much better in death. So I just don't go there. But you do hear, though, sometimes when mediums walk through those locations that the nursing staff comes back. The nursing staff's still there. They're still attending to the patients like it was their regular job. And you almost have to wonder if those nurses or those orderlies or those doctors that when they passed over realized they still had work to do when they came back to help those people try to find a way to transition.
Well, now, when you go into some of these places, it's closed and totally run down, like nursing homes and stuff like that. Do you think that the spirits and of the ones that's passed are still living in that time period, and that's why they're still there doing their job?
It could be that too. It depends on how aware they are when they passed over. I mean, if they did transition and became universally aware, what do you want to call it? You want to call it heaven? You want to call it, the next level? What do you want to call it? And they become universally aware. They can come back and do jobs. They will get assignments to do things down here. And they're very much aware that they're dead. They're very much aware of what's happened to them and why their life was the way it was, but they might come down and help. There might be other ones, too, that were so gravitated to that location day in and day out, 24 hours a day. When they die, that may be all they know. And they might return to the place.
Do you think that they see it as the way it was then, not all run down and closed? I mean, it's just like they're still going to patients' rooms and waiting on them. So I would assume that they see it in that time period.
Yeah, if they're not universally aware, then they may see it just the way they were when they died. It may not change. And there's been some interesting thoughts about that in regards to transitioning out of body, what that energy state might consist of. And there's been some talk about, well, if an energy is zero mass, it has no choice but then to travel at the speed of light. Once you become closer to the speed of light, time stops for you. Time doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So if you decide that you're going to stay here in that state, you may not be aware of time changing for you. Just like those poor guys out at Gettysburg. They still think it's July 1863. And to us, that's unfathomable because it's been over 150 years.
Right.
But to them, time does not exist.
Right.
And en masse, they have decided their reality is this. They have more than just one person reinforcing that. Because I've been out there on the field and I've talked to some of these entities, and somebody else will jump in and talk and say, don't listen to her. She's lying. She's making it up. She's crazy. Don't listen to her. You know what our reality is. We got to get back to the line. We got fighting to do. And so you have multiple consciousnesses enforcing the rules of that reality because they died en masse. So me coming in and telling them that the war is over, of course they're going to look at me like I'm crazy because they have all their buddies there standing right next to them with their guns loaded saying, hey, come on, we got to go.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's only so much I know I can do when I go to a location like that. If I'm dealing with an entity one-on-one that wants to talk to me, some of them become aware when I start talking. They might already have some telltale signs or some things that they've noticed that, man, well, you know what, maybe my buddies don't know what they're talking about. I have noticed those carriages out on the road there without horses, and I don't understand why they don't have horses attached to them.
Wow.
You got all these roads running through with cars. Or they'll see these women walking around without skirts on.
Darcie, you're basically describing also the Buddhist experience, where when you start meditating for long periods, you're going to start looking at, well, what is this reality? Is this reality real? And who's making it that way? So it's fascinating what you're talking about.
All right.
Well, and
we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. Be about 4 or 5 minutes. Darcie, just remember your mic is live, so don't go hollering and jumping up and down dancing. And we'll be back in about 4 or 5 minutes. So I guess
I'm still connected.
Jeff, you get to take us out.
Yeah, you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat, Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's returning guest, Darcie McGrath. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.